And welcome to WION Live Broadcast from Washington, D.C. I'm Nick Harper, and in this bulletin we'll bring you a roundup of the stories developing around the world. First up, the headlines. After 4 days of closed-door talks, top CCP leaders give the green light to President Xi Jinping's historic resolution, cementing his legacy in Chinese history. Experts cautiously welcome a joint pact by China and the United States to accelerate climate action this decade, as COP26 negotiations edge towards their end, but with no clear plan to limit heating to 1.5 degrees Celsius. Nobel Peace Prize winner F.W. de Klerk, the last president of apartheid South Africa, who was a key actor in the country's transition to democracy, has died at the age of 85. Belarus blames the European Union for the crisis that has left hundreds of migrants trapped on its border with Poland, saying it's ready for talks, but the EU refuses.
There were
Carl Rittenhouse, the American teen who shot 3 people during anti-racism protests in Wisconsin, breaks down during his trial, claims to have taken action in self-defense. And Tesla CEO Elon Musk offloads company shares worth $5 billion days after setting a Twitter poll in which millions voted, asking whether he should sell 10% of his huge stake.
Battery packs, maybe solar, and Alright. Everyone! We're going to have an option in the options.
As the global economies recover from coronavirus lockdown-induced slowdowns, another major problem they're battling now is rising inflation. The world's largest economy, the United States, had witnessed its biggest gain in inflation in the last 30 years. US consumer prices surged 6.2% compared to the same month last year. It was the largest annual jump in the consumer price index since 1990. The surge has been driven by increases in gasoline, automobiles and food prices. Analysts fear inflation could remain uncomfortably high well into next year. US President Joe Biden said fighting inflation is his administration's top priority.
Today's economic report showing unemployment continued to fall, but consumer prices remain too high. Tell us, the American people, in the midst of this economic crisis, the recovery is showing strong results, but not to them. They're still looking out there. Everything from a gallon of gas to a loaf of bread costs more, and it's worrisome, even though wages are going up.
The world's largest economy is recovering from the pandemic downturn last year. It's also struggling with scarce labour and supply chain issues that have driven prices higher. Experts say inflation is eroding the strong gains in wages and salaries that have come to American workers in recent months.
Gas prices are outrageous. They're holding up all these boats in the water, they say, not letting them come in the port. But people are suffering, especially people in middle class and low class, cannot afford to be paying gas prices of $4. Soon it'll be $4.
I think that particularly like the meats, they've been inching up over the last few months.
Gas prices today are ridiculous, all right, in that, you know, what I think I saw, I was on the New Jersey Turnpike, and it was $4.14. So I decided, just for premium, so I decided to drive to Delaware, right? And in Delaware, I think it was like 10 cents more, you know, so you just get it and you keep moving.
So in the holiday season, you know, we're still seeing some things that aren't going up in price, like apparel. We are seeing things that are going up in price, again, like furnishings. In general, on average, if your holiday shopping list is focused on imported goods, you're probably going to be paying higher prices.
While Biden argues that the increases are temporary, rising inflation has given his opponents a potent counter-argument to the spending plans that he's staking his presidency on. But for more on this, we can cross live to Susan Tarani, who's joining us from New York City. Well, Susan, Joe Biden, he's facing yet another domestic challenge, with prices soaring and his approval rating at the same time dipping. How is the Biden administration, do you think, planning to try and tackle this latest challenge?
Well, once again, Joe Biden is betting on another spending bill, and he's banking on his Build Back Better plan. He claims that, first of all, 17 Nobel Prize laureates say that this plan is going to lower inflation. He says by reducing child care and affordable health care and cutting taxes for Americans, this plan is going to help Americans and the United States go back on track. But however, if his previous spending plan is any indication, that really wasn't the case. If you remember, after injecting about $4 trillion in COVID relief during the Trump administration, the Biden administration came right after, despite seeing signs of economic recovery, and injected $1.9 trillion into the economy and distributed checks to the population. And some argue that that extra check provided an incentive for people to not go back to work, and the economy started to improve. And then we saw a shortage in the workforce, small businesses going back to work, higher prices to try to pay and fix the gap of cost and supply and demand. And then here we are. And then, you know, we heard about the inflation. Everything is related to energy prices. On the one hand, this administration wants to cut on the production of U.S. drilling. A lot of the workforce in the United States relies on gas pipelines. On the other hand, it's begging OPEC to produce more oil. So, you know, these are some of the main problems that we're facing right now, and perhaps the mismanagement and the policies, the progressive policies that this administration is putting forward is causing the catastrophe that we're seeing right now, one that we haven't seen in the last 31 years. And again, the administration is focusing on another spending bill. That's what they see as the way out. And I think the elections that we saw last week in Virginia and elsewhere tilting towards Republicans is an indication that it might not be the right path to go.
Well, absolutely. And look, Susan, we've got Thanksgiving and Christmas. They're just around the corner here in the US. But of course, rising inflation, it could dampen the holiday season. What can you tell us about the mood among the people and how they're feeling as we head into that holiday season time?
You know, it's absolutely devastating. I think people are just, first of all, exhausted coming out of the COVID pandemic. They were looking forward to a holiday season that was perhaps a little more festive. First, a few months back, we had Anthony Fauci making headlines saying that people can't gather together because of COVID restrictions. The White House sort of went back and downturned that. And then now people go to the grocery stores and they see that they can't really rely on the basic staples of what's very important for Americans, and that's Thanksgiving dinner, that's Christmas dinner, and then the gifts that they want to buy for their children and their families. I mean, the prices are really staggering when you look at it. And you talk to people and you say what's most important to them, and they really talk about the basic needs. And what they don't talk about in terms of what is the most important aspect of life to them is climate change, and that's something that this administration has constantly been focusing on. So with the mandates, with climate change, with focus on issues that is really not important to Americans right now, the administration seems out of touch. The mood is dampened around the holiday season, and then, you know, again, coming back and going to the gas pump and coming home. That's just another aspect that has really left many Americans with a big question mark. You have to remember, a lot of people can't just sit on Zoom and do their work. Many Americans really need to get in a car and go to work, and this sense of uncertainty has left this administration in a really bad place, and Americans in a sense of uncertainty. I don't think they're looking for a handout from the government. They really want to get back to work and be able to go to the store and buy their kids' toys and sit around the Thanksgiving table with their families and just have a regular life.
Thank you, Susan, for that update and that analysis. That was Susan Tehrani joining us live from New York City. The world's two largest emitters of carbon dioxide, the United States and China, have unveiled a deal to ramp up cooperation tackling climate change. The two nations have been sparring over various issues, but have now vowed to work together to cut methane emissions, phase out coal consumption, and to protect forests.
Today, the United States and China are releasing a joint declaration.
In a surprise move, the United States and China, the world's two largest emitters of carbon dioxide, on Wednesday unveiled a deal to work together tackling climate change by cutting methane emissions, phasing out coal consumption, and protecting forests. The framework agreement was announced by U.S. climate envoy John Kerry and his Chinese counterpart Xie Jinping.
First, this declaration includes strong statements about the alarming science, the emissions gap, and the urgent need to accelerate the action to close that gap. This is critical. Second, it commits to a series of important actions, not in the long term, not way out in the future, but now during this decade when it's needed.
Speaking through an interpreter, Xie told reporters that the deal would see China strengthen its emissions-cutting targets and develop a national plan on methane. It was billed by both as a way to tip the UN Climate Summit towards success. A first draft of the COP26 agreement, released earlier in the day, received a mixed response from climate activists and experts. Almost 200 countries present in Glasgow have until the close of the two-week meeting on Friday to agree to the final text. The overarching goal of the conference is to keep alive hopes of capping global temperatures at 1.5 degrees Celsius or 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit above pre-industrial levels, which is far out of reach on the basis of countries' current emissions-cutting pledges. The EU climate policy chief told Reuters the US-China agreement gave room for hope, adding, quote, "It's really encouraging to see that those countries that were at odds in so many areas have found common ground on what is the biggest challenge humanity faces today."
Chinese President Xi Jinping has issued a warning to countries in the Asia-Pacific region. He said that Cold War-era tensions might return unless countries cooperated on issues like climate change and the COVID pandemic. Amid growing tensions with the United States over a host of issues, President Xi warned that all countries in the region must work together on these joint challenges.
The Asia-Pacific region cannot and should not relapse into the confrontation and division of the Cold War era. Attempts to draw ideological lines or form small circles on geopolitical grounds are bound to fail.
The Chinese president also called to make COVID-19 vaccines more accessible to the developing nations, saying that action should translate to ensuring fair and equitable distribution. He said countries should step up cooperation in research and in mutual recognition of vaccines so that the world could emerge from the shadow of the pandemic and kick-start the global economic recovery. President Xi also spoke on the importance of green development. The latest comments come ahead of virtual talks to be held between Xi and President Biden, which according to reports could be held as soon as next week. It's going to be a high-stakes meeting. Washington and Beijing have been sparring over a number of issues, but recently tensions have soared over Beijing's increased military activities near Taiwan. China sent a record number of planes into Taiwan's air defense identification zone last month. The US has pledged military support to Taiwan, saying it will make sure that Taiwan has the means to defend itself. Besides Taiwan, China's claims on the resource-rich islands in the South China Sea is another big flashpoint between the two sides. Trillions of dollars in shipping trade pass annually through the South China Sea, and the region is claimed by Brunei, Malaysia, the Philippines, Taiwan and Vietnam, whose claims China rejects. In an attempt to counter China's growing influence in the Indo-Pacific, the US, Britain and Australia recently announced the formation of AUKUS, a partnership under which Australia will acquire nuclear-powered submarines. Next, US Vice President Kamala Harris and French President Emmanuel Macron met in Paris for talks aimed to improve strained relations between their two countries. Harris arrived in Paris on Tuesday for a 4-day visit.
We will discuss a lot of issues, including one of the markers, sadly, of this new era, which is the pandemic, but creating then an opportunity for us to continue the work we have done since Professor Pasteur at the Institute where I was yesterday around scientific research, the work we can do together being prompted by the tragedy of this pandemic around a shared commitment for preparedness for the next pandemic.
The meeting is part of efforts by Washington to mend relations with one of its oldest allies after the surprise submarine deal left France somewhat in the lurch. The relationship between Washington and Paris hit a new low after a US-British submarine deal with Australia scuttled a French contract to sell submarines to Australia. France was angry about being kept in the dark about the deal, calling it a stab in the back. France had briefly withdrawn its ambassador to the US in September after that submarine deal, and as a result of the US deal, Australia cancelled its own $65 billion contract to buy French-made submarines.
Également pour ces échanges bilatéraux et votre présence pour la conférence sur la Libye que nous tiendrons vendredi après-midi. J'ai conscience que la France vous offre un programme chargé. Et donc je suis extrêmement reconnaissant de votre présence. Mais plus que ça, sachez que vous êtes la bienvenue à Paris en France. Je vous remercie ce matin d'avoir honoré de votre présence un lieu de la recherche des excellences françaises et je sais les liens intimes qui vous lient à cette discipline.
Harris's meeting with Macron came towards the end of her second day in Paris, hours after she visited an American cemetery. She paid her respects to American service members who died in the 2 world wars. The high-level meeting comes less than 2 weeks after US President Joe Biden met Macron on the sidelines of the G20 summit in Rome. Biden had acknowledged that his administration had handled the submarine deal in a clumsy way.
That such a situation will not be possible for stronger coordination.
On August the 29th, the Ahmadi family of Kabul lost 10 members of their family, including 7 children. They all died in a US drone strike gone awry during the chaos of the Afghanistan troop withdrawal. The Pentagon said it would look into reparations and evacuate the family. But 64 days on, the family is still awaiting justice and is yet to hear from the American administration.
The graves of the Ahmadi family are about 2 months old. 10 of them were killed in the chaos of the troop withdrawal from Afghanistan by the US and its allies when an American drone strike hit their home by mistake. 7 children were killed, some as young as 2. Now, the family wants to know why, after all this time, they haven't heard a word back from the Pentagon, which said after the disaster that it would look into paying reparations to the family and getting them out of the country.
The dead body of my nephew was behind this car. People rushed to pick up the dead bodies and took them away from here. The body of my brother, Zamarai Ahmadi, was behind the other car. His son was in the driver's seat, as well as his other kids, who were also inside that car when the attack happened. It was the worst moment of my life. They promised us that those responsible for carrying out the attack would be tried in court, compensation would be paid, and they take us out of the country. They must stay true to their commitments.
U.S. forces thought they were targeting an Islamic State suicide bomber. Instead, they targeted Ajmal's brother, who was actually working for an NGO based in the States called Nutrition and Education International. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin himself has publicly said that the family is innocent, but last week the Military Inspector General's office said it didn't believe this was a case of criminal negligence and that no disciplinary action was needed for the forces involved. A Pentagon spokesperson told Reuters they were still looking into a response without providing details. They said it was for the family's safety and privacy. The American Civil Liberties Union is also involved in the case, though, representing that NGO. It says the family has repeatedly asked for transparency and received none. In the meantime, the Ahmadi family waits, hoping justice arrives.
Frederick Willem de Klerk, the last white person to lead South Africa, has died at the age of 85. He breathed the last this morning at his home in Cape Town. The former South African president was diagnosed with cancer earlier this year. De Klerk, and South Africa's first black president, Nelson Mandela, were the Nobel Peace Prize recipients back in 1993. The duo were awarded for leading the transition from white rule in the country. It's been over 20 years since the end of apartheid, but de Klerk's rule in the transition to democracy remains highly contested. He's most remembered for his famous speech in 1990, announcing the lifting of a ban on the African National Congress and other liberation movements.
Today, the prohibition of the African National Congress, the Pan-Africanist Congress, the South African Communist Party and a number of subsidiary organizations is being rescinded.
De Klerk headed South Africa's white minority government until 1994, when Nelson Mandela's ANC party swept to power. Many black South Africans, though, have blamed de Klerk for failing to curb violence during his time in power. White supremacists, however, viewed his efforts to end apartheid as a betrayal. While testifying at the Truth and Reconciliation Commission on behalf of the National Party in 1996 and 1997, his apology for apartheid was criticised as being insufficient.
Ladies and gentlemen, today I want to make it clear from the outset that within my knowledge and experience they never included the authorization of assassination, murder, torture, rape, assault or the like. I have never been part of any decision taken by Cabinet, the State Security Council or any committee authorizing or instructing the commission of such gross violations of human rights. Nor did I individually, directly or indirectly ever suggest, order or authorize any such action.
De Klerk was diagnosed in March with mesothelioma, a cancer that affects the tissue lining in the lungs. He's survived by his wife Alita, his children Jan and Susan, and his grandchildren. He retired from active politics in August 1997.
Today will be written up in our history.
It has been said the future of South Africa largely rests in the hands of these two men.
Well, thanks very much for watching today. I'm Nick Harper, ending this broadcast live from Washington, D.C. Keep watching for the latest updates.
There are many other...
This is right, Arab.